Okay, hello everyone. Everyone had a wonderful week. Um, this week's parsha is Parshas Mishpatim, and we'll start off trying to ask. We're gonna ask some kashas, and hopefully we'll get an insight really both into Parshas Yisro and Parshas Mishpatim. Not suppose I didn't post anything last week, and hopefully it will be transformative for those who listen. So the pasuk says, "V'elim mishpatim b'shutasim leifneihem," and Rashi, Chazal, everyone takes notice that there's a vav, and it's ve'ela. So Rashi says, "Kol makom shenemar eila." Every time it says eila, that is pasal rishayin. However, ve'ela moisef rishayin. So ve'ela is moisef on the rishayin. So my rishayin misinai, af elu misinai. So essentially, Rashi is saying that just like there's a dibros which were in the last week's parsha are from Har Sinai, so too the mishpatim that's going to list in this week's parsha are from Har Sinai as well. Okay. Then Rashi says, "V'lama nismecha parshas dinin the parshas mizbeach." Why is parshas dinin next to parshas mizbeach, which was the end of last week's parsha? It was with mizbach adamat hasali. To tell you that you should put the Sanhedrin next to the Mikdash. Now, okay, so let's go slow. The kasha number one is like this. Kasha number one is, what is really going on here? In other words, you have something called Har Sinai. Har Sinai is where the Torah was given, correct? So simply speaking, Moshe was there for 40 days. He learned the entire Torah, right? And according to most people, he learned everything. He learned Torah Shabbat Peh, he learned the Machlekes, he learned everything. So what is the significance of saying that the mishpatim are given, the mishpatim are given from Har Sinai? The entire Torah is given from Har Sinai because Moshe received the entire Torah while it was up there in the mountain. So what does Misinai even mean? What do you mean, Ma Rishonim Misinai? If I'm Misinai, the entire Torah is Misinai. What shaykh is Misinai? And even once we answer that kasha, we have to understand, so what? So let's say we understand somehow that there were specific things that were said from Sinai, the event of Sinai. So, fine. So let's say we somehow are able to mechal like that. So now who cares? Who cares that it was said at Sinai? Either way, Hashem said it. Hashem told you to do it. It's certainly not going to make a nafkamina in the level of chaymer, of stringency and of seriousness in which you have to take the words. Let's imagine Mishpatim weren't said from Sinai. Would that make any difference? They hear in the Torah. Who cares? So that's kasha number two. And kasha number three is, on Rashi, Rashi is seemingly putting these two things together, when they should be, they're two separate things. Rashi is telling you that Ve'ila is Moisef, and then he's saying, oh, what does that have to do with the first part of the Rashi? Why are these two things in the same Rashi? These are two separate things. So you have Ve'ila Moisef Rishon to tell you that they're from Sinai, and you have an idea that all parshas, if there's a smicha, so sometimes there's a drasha, so fine, so say. Why are these in the same Rashi? What's the connection between the two? It's like, it's Pashat Rashi, this is a continuation of what he just said. This is a lama, with the vav over there. Like, what shaykhs? What shaykhs is the smichas, Sanhedrin, and Mikdash have to do with Mishpat and being from Sinai? Okay, that's kasha number one. Kasha number two is, why did the Torah split up the event of Har Sinai into two parshas? Because we know that the end of this week's parsha, which is over here that I'm showing you, it says that so Nasav and Nishma is actually in Parshas Mishpatim, whereas in Parshas Yisro there was no Nasav and Nishma. Yet, it's an intuitive. We have an understanding that Parshas Yisro is the parsha of Kabbalah Satara because that's where the source of Deborah are listed, etc. So, what is the point of the Torah starting the event of Har Sinai, telling you that there's Dibris, and the Klal Yisrael hearing them, and then stopping with the Mishpatim, and then continuing with the story of actually Sinai, and the whole thing of Nasa and Ishma, which is what most people associate with the greatness of the event of Har Sinai, and not even in Parshat Yisro, it's Parshat Mishpatim at the end. So I think that's a question that needs to be answered. What's the point of the split, and what's the significance of the two parshas as they are separately, and that's that is the kasha. Okay, now if we go to Parshas Yisro for a second, so we have a very fascinating thing. It says that Yisro heard Yishma Yisro, so Mashma Shema creates of Mechamas Hamalek. So we want to understand what is it exactly about these two things that made it that Yisro came. And then we understand this next Rashi as well. Yeser Asher Hashem Sheyiter Parsha Achas B'Torah. What does it mean that Yisro is Meyaser Parsha Achas B'Torah? I mean, L'chayra, which is the Parsha of Atas Sechzeh. Rashi says here Hashem Atas Sechzeh. So, I mean, what about that? I mean, we have to understand first of all, what does it mean that Yisro is Meyaser the Parsha? L'chayra, the entire Torah is begun in Nevuah. If Hashem told Moshe to write it, then it was that's what was always going to happen. So Yisro wasn't miyaseh anything; he didn't make anything extra. And then also, why does Rashi say that? If we look at the actual thing, Yisro starts talking over here, pasuk Yud Zayin. There's only pasuk Chav Aleph, which means that for some reason the idea that Yisro is miyaseh parsha doesn't start from when he starts talking to Moshe about the Eitzah, but it starts from Vatas Zechazeh. So that's also a problem. Then we have the biggest problem of all. I don't know if anybody was emet in this last week. It's a Plias de Rashi, and that is that where Yisro says to Moshe, if you follow my advice about the Shoftim, so if you do what I tell you and God commands it to you, then you will be able to stand. So Rashi says, so he says, he malich begvura. Ask God. If God commands you to do this, to chalamod, then you'll be able to stand and you'll be able to last and you'll have a good system. You can't make this up; it's right here in front of you. If Hashem is going to meaning He's going to tell you that you can't do this, so lo su chalamod, you will not be able to be oimed. In other words, you won't be able to last. So it's a plea. What is going on over here? Yisro is telling Moshe, if you follow my advice and God agrees with my advice that I gave you, then it's all good. You'll be able to survive. Everything will be well. But if God doesn't follow the advice that I gave you and He tells you that you do something else, you won't be able to make it. So Yitzhak is coming to Misgayer, and he's coming to Mekabel with the Torah, but at the same time he's he's saying hypocrisis. He's saying, oh, if God doesn't command you to do what I said, you won't be able to stand. And then Moshe listens to this hypocrisis. I mean, what exactly? I mean, it's a plea. It's a mamash plea. And when the pasuk says, "V'yishma Moshe kol choseno," it doesn't even say that Moshe asked Hakadosh Baruch Hu. It just says he listened to his father-in-law. That's all it says. It doesn't even say that he was in Melech Shechina. And we don't find that Yisro has ever, called out for this, and we don't find that he's wrong. We just find that it's done what he says. So it needs to be understood. How is this possible? Okay, so those are the questions. So now let's try to begin an answer on what is actually happening here. And we're going to want to touch based off this parsha over here, and we're going to understand what Yisro wanted with this encounter with Moshe Rabbeinu. And we'll say that essentially what's going on is that Moshe Rabbeinu Yisro says to Moshe, "V'yomer Moshe, ani chosencha Yisro b'yelecha, v'ishtecha u'shnei v'ne'im." So ani chosencha Yisro, im yinad yotze begini, tzei begin ishtecha. The minute yotze begin ishtecha, tzei begin shnei v'ne'im. So Rashi makes clear like this: Yisro wants Moshe to be yotze. He wants Moshe to leave his encampment. Okay, and obviously the reason why that is because Moshe Rabbeinu is the Melech, and the Melech is always the party which is kavua, because that's the way of kavod, and by you come to the Melech by showing respect, you come to the Melech. That's how you show him respect. He doesn't have to go to you; you go to him. So now Yisro wants Moshe to come out of his makom kviyas, to come out of his position, so to speak, physically, but the physical act of coming out will signify the humility of the kingship and of the leadership, and he wants him to come for the sake of himself, and if not for the sake of himself, for his wife, and if not for the sake of his wife, for the sake of his two kids. Now, what does this mean? Essentially, what's going on is that Yisro is the embodiment of the known concept, which is that Derech Eretz is Koydem to Torah. The lashon of the Mishnah and Avos is Imein Derech Eretz Ein Torah, Imein Torah Ein Derech Eretz. Lashon that we know of as Derech Eretz Kodmo Torah. Now, what that means is the following thing, and this is very, very intuitive and pashut, which is that the aside of what the Torah comes to do is that it comes to higher the standard of humanity and of human senses in terms of relationships with others and with God. It comes to higher those standards, and it comes to make them a real and an objective manner of expressing self, as opposed to a nicety, which means the core thing that has to occur, the core thing that has to be in order for a Torah to affect someone, is that he has to have derech eretz. And derech eretz means a multitude of things throughout the texts. It means relations with someone's wife. It means work. It means having midos, and it means I think those are the three: work, relations, midos, and midos. Yeah. So essentially, the idea over here is that all those things, what they say is, they are an indicator that a person is rooted in the reality of his humanity as a basis for who he is. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the leader of the entire nation, and he was the king. He was the one that took them out of Mitzrayim, and all the motion happened through him. And now Yisro is coming to potentially be Mizgayer to this nation. And so what Yisro wants to know is the leader of this nation, is he someone who now has made it such, which unfortunately there's a lot of people these days that have made it such, that their connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was a factor which required them to sacrifice the reality of their basic humanity, and therefore now Moshe Rabbeinu is simply going to say, "Oh, I'm above respecting my father. I'm above respecting my wife. I'm above children. I'm a godly man. I'm too good for this world." Is he going to say that? Is that going to be his attitude? Is that going to be the status that he is in? Or is it going to be that not only is he that his relationship with Hakadosh Baruch Hu made it such that all of his relationships and all the respect that he has for the people who are his, who he's supposed to have respect for, those things are increased tenfold and are made not just something of a nicety, like manners, but they're actually an intrinsic chelik of who he is now due to his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because one's relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is essentially a solidification of right and wrong and correct and incorrect into an identity level. That's really what it is. So the aside of what this means is that this is what Yisro is trying to figure out when he's going to him as guy. And then it says Vayetze Moshe likras choseno, that Moshe went out likras his choseno. That's a pasuk says emphasizes this, that Moshe came out not for his wife, not for his two sons, but even just for the respect of his father-in-law. He came out of the camp, and Chazal say that everyone came out as well, meaning the entire Klal Yisrael went out to greet Yisro because of the fact that he was Moshe's father-in-law. Because Moshe viewed it as a core factor of what he was, that he had to respect his father-in-law, even though his father-in-law is a guy. So it's very, very, very clear that this is the aside. And with this aside, we can now begin to understand the breakdown of what is going on and why the entire parsha of Kabbalah Torah is named after Yisro, and what the system over here of the V'at is coming to do, which is that Yisro is the person who, as a ger, Chazal say that what he did was he tried every religion that existed. In other words, he mamish worshipped every religion that existed, and he found them to be false. And then he came to Yiddishkeit, and Yiddishkeit obviously was the one that he found to be the true one. And the underlying side of what makes that significant is the fact that the essential aspect of the Metzias of Yiddishkeit is that what's required for someone to be a Jew and to have Kabbalah Torah is that he has to have Yediyah of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and Yediyah means experiential knowledge. In other words, that you relate to something in a manner as true because of the fact that you experience that thing. And the nafkamina of the reality of that way of relating to reality is that manner of relating to reality has the ability to create an immediate difference in the being that you are. So what that means is Yisro was menasa. He tried every religion, as opposed to hearing about it and intellectualizing, breaking it down and deciding whether it's true or not. He tried it. The reason why that is because Yisro was a being who demanded experiential knowledge of a reality for that reality to enter his being and be able to cause a change. And that experiential reality was the mechanism. That is the Derech Eretz. In other words, the Derech Eretz means that I am a person and I experience the world as part of what I am. That's what Derech Eretz means. And therefore, that person, that being who has a self and he has a basic sense of humanity, that self now internalizes his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu becomes the new basis of the way that he looks at the world. And this is just the most basic understanding of the split now, is that the event of Gilui L'Shechina and Har Sinai was not the event that happened in Mishpatim. There was two different things that were going on, and that's, I think I mentioned in the past, as shown by the Haggadah. It says, "Either Kirvani Lifnei Sinai, but that there would have been enough if we came in front of Har Sinai, but it wouldn't have gotten the Torah." That's because Har Sinai was a different event than Kabbalah Torah. Har Sinai was its own event, and Kabbalah Torah was its own event. And what was Har Sinai? Har Sinai, the Gilui L'Shechina of Har Sinai, was the Metzias of what occurred was that Kadosh Baruch Hu was nigla to us, and we and him came into a bris, a relationship. They came into a relationship. That occurred. What we saw in Har Sinai is the basis of all the Emunah for Yiddishkeit, and it's the point in which we experienced the reality of God. Experienced, and I'm saying that dafka based off this entire theme of Yisro. We experienced the reality of God. We didn't think about it. We didn't have proof. That's the whole basis of the difference between Yiddishkeit and other religions. Millions of people experienced Gilui Shechina. All other religions were started by a single person who then decided to, maybe if it's the religion, but we experienced HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is emphasized throughout the entire parsha. Atem Re'isem, right? It says, that's what Hashem says over and over again. You saw me. You saw me. Atem Re'isem, Kivnei Shemei Divarti Imachem. That's what it says in the pasuk. You saw that I talked to you. Right? You saw that I talked to you. That's the whole point. That's the whole proof of the Har Sinai. That you saw that I talked to you. You experienced me. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling to them. And once they experienced HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is itself the reality of the solidification of the relationship between them and God, and that was achieved by Gilui Shechina, period. Not even Kabbalah Torah. Not the Kabbalah Torah was another stage. That was just Gilui Shechina, and that was just what was required for them to have a relationship, just like I have a relationship with my friend, my husband, my wife, my father. I have a relationship with God. God is a being that I experienced, that I saw, and He wants a relationship with me. That's a relationship. That's it. That is the entire gather of what a Jew is. Now, the Torah comes as a manner in which to upkeep that relationship, and as a period to that relationship is, and how to do it, and when to do it, and etc., etc. That's the essence of what happened in Gilui Sinai, and that's the essence of what Yisro is contributing, and therefore, that is the idea of the concept of that the parsha of Gilui Har Sinai was in Parshas Yisro. Now that we understand that, and before we do that, we can now get a better understanding of why it is that Yisro came. Mashmar Shamoba, so what we also see later on the psukim that the reason why because what they did Zadonin. And Rashi says, so Yisro was inspired, and he now knew that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was greater, Atayadati, which is the experiential knowledge. And this is where you see that Rashi says, which is what we just pointed out. So what does that mean? That means is that what religion says is, there's a God. God is greater than everything. Worship Him, and you'll get existence, and you'll get brachos. You get the next world. That's what almost all religions have that tenet. Yiddishkeit, and what Yisro saw was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not a God that said, "Oh, I'm all great and I'm all this and all that. Just do what I say, etc." HaKadosh Baruch Hu cared about every single being, and He punished and rewarded them according to their maisim, and therefore the mitzias of relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not one of bittul, it was one of building. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with the person is one that will build up the person, because He cares specifically about what that person did, and He cares to respond to him exactly in the manner that that person behaved. And therefore, that gives that person significance to his choices, and it gives him an opportunity to develop and grow and grow and grow and grow, and to have midah connected midah at all times. And the way that I know that this is on an individual level is from a fascinating pasuk in Yehoshua. It says in Yehoshua, when Yehoshua is talking to the Jewish people before he dies, and he's describing the event of Kriyas Yamsuf, it says, "Vayitakul Hashem, and Vayasam Afel ben Echem ben Mitzrayim." It says, He put a darkness to you and the Egyptians, and it says, Vayavei Alav es Hayam. It says He brought on him the water. Now it should say aleihem, because it's on all the Egyptians. So it says Rashi, Rashi says HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the ocean onto each single Mitzri. Let's say there was one of them that was running away. Because they didn't want to go into the ocean. Gal Shel Yam, a wave would come out of the water, Rodef Acharav, run after him, Vikolta, and it would take him in. So, in other words, the aside over here is not that, it's not just that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does Midah Keneged Midah, and therefore he's an attentive God. He's a God that wants and the development and cares about every single person enough to give him the Midah Keneged Midah, as opposed to just destroying him or wiping him out, according to Midas Hadin, but that it's on every individual, and every individual is paid to attention on that level of development. And that you see from the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the Yam in each individual mitzvah, like you see from Sefer Yehoshua. Okay, so now once we have that in our heads, if we can contain that information, we can now go back and we can now insert Ve'ela Mishpata. Ve'ela Mishpata means, we said, so what's the nafkamina of it being Misinai? Before we answer this question, it's brought in the Rabbeinu Bechai and the Ramban as well, that Rabbeinu Bechai says like this: the Inyan HaMishkan, Hayadugmas Har Sinai. The Mishkan was an example of Har Sinai. The Hakavod Sheshachan al Har Sinai, the honor, the Gilui Shechina that occurred at Har Sinai, Benigla, that happened there in Parhesia, in light, Hu Sheshachan al Mishkan Benistar. This is also in the Ramban. So, what the Rabbeinu Bechai is telling us is that the Shechina that was on Har Sinai was transferred from Har Sinai into the Mishkan. And we can now get a better understanding of what we just said with our Chiddush about the Gilui Shechina and Har Sinai being a separate thing from Bas HaTorah, because we know that the Mishkan was where the Karbanos were brought. And we know that Karbanos are the sug of Avodah, the sug of worshiping Hashem, which is under the title of Avodah. Right? The Mishnah Nova says, I'll show you the Ramah moment. Avodah ba'atayra g'mis chasad. So Mishkan is where the Karbanos are bought. That's Mizbeach. Everybody knows that. And yet the Rabbeinu Bechai is telling us that the same Shekhinah that was on Har Sinai was transferred to the Mishkan, even though the Mishkan is a totally different type of relationship to God than Torah. Because if it's true that what we said is, if let's say what we didn't say was true, and that the entire point of Har Sinai was just the Torah, so then how does it make sense that the Shekhinah that was in Har Sinai is now in the Mishkan? The Mishkan is an entirely different mode of serving Hashem. It's through Karbanos. The whole way that we served Hashem and Har Sinai was through the Mekabel Torah. Torah and Avodah are two totally separate things. Elamai, Rabbeinu Bechai is telling us, and it's very clear, and Ramban says it as well, that the Gilui Shechina that happened, that first part of the Gilui Shechina, that itself was the idea that we established a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, period. And like the Medrash says in other places, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that he wants, if the Torah is considered his daughter, and he basically, the Medrash says that we should make a place for HaKadosh Baruch Hu in our homes, basically among us, among the Jewish people. So the idea is that the Gilui Shechina that was on the Sinai was just the Gilui Shechina that was the establishment of the relationship between us and God, which is what the whole Mishkan is, that Hashem is B'Saychenu, He's among us, and that's what it was accomplished in Har Sinai. That was the idea of Har Sinai, separately from the fact that on Har Sinai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu also gave us a Torah which we then accepted. But that happened in a totally separate parsha, Parshat Mishpatim. Okay, so now let's get to this. So what does this mean? What does it mean that it's Misinai? So what we said was like this. What we said was that the Mishpatim are the things which are intuitive. They're Be'el Mechaveros for the most part. And there's something that you could have said was an expression just of the fact that, listen, it makes sense, it's logical. And therefore, I'm doing it because this is just how it makes sense that things should run. So therefore, what's being said is that Mishpatim, when we perform the Mishpatim and we uphold society, etc., we shouldn't do it on a level in which it is simply because of the logic and makes sense to us that this is how it should be, and therefore we're going to do it that way, which is what most societies do. But rather, no, even the mishpatim are misinai. What does it mean misinai? It means that even the mishpatim that we do, which are intuitive, we have to do as an expression of the fact that we are in a relationship with God, and by us doing the mishpatim, we are prioritizing and doing God's will. That is the significance of what it means that it's misinai. The upholding of the mishpatim should be an act of relationship. Har Sinai was an act of relationship. It was an act of us getting to know, having the idea of God, which means that for us, when we do the mishpatim, it should be as an act of knowing God. Just like Har Sinai was an act of knowing God, these are from Har Sinai, meaning that we should do them as an act of relating to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to simply because of the way that society has to organize itself. And now we can also understand why is Din Sanhedrin it's on Mikdash. And now we finally get it, especially based on the Beit Bechai, that since the Sanhedrin is the legislative body of the Jewish people, who organizes all of their halachas and organizes all the disputes, etc. So you would say, okay, that's a separate thing from the Mikdash. The Mikdash is a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a holy spiritual thing. But this is just organizing society and deciding disputes, etc. Says the Rashi, says Ksei Chazal, no, don't think that. Rather, Sanhedrin needs to be next to the Mikdash. Why? Because legislation and dinim and deciding court cases is a matter of kedusha. It's a matter of Mikdash, of Har Sinai, which is the same kavod that was in the Mishkan, like we just saw. And therefore, the Mikdash and the Mishkan are the same place. And that's what the Gemara says, that Mikdash Ekri Mishkan, Mishkan Ekri Mikdash, and therefore, that is why this is what it's saying. Sanhedrin Eitzel HaMikdash. Okay, so Lemaisa, what we're saying is like this. Lemaisa, what we're saying is that that's the cheshbon, but Lemaisa, what we're saying is that the real life takeaway over here is very, very simply that the aside, every part of a Jewish person's life, no matter how simple, no matter how intuitive, no matter how basic, can be done in a manner in which it expresses his commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we get this from the concept of mishpatim, that mishpatim are essentially organizations of society and manner and things that are, for the most part, very, very intuitive. And therefore, what we're being told is that don't do things, even though they might be intuitive, even though they are, essential for the upholding of society, etc. Those things need to be done, and they're nemar mi Sinai. And therefore, what is being said is that every maisa that a yid does can be done as an expression of his commitment to his relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the other big takeaway of this is that there is no such thing as religion and observance coming ever at the expense of derech eretz, of regard for all relationships, and those two things can never clash or one override the other. And if they do, then the religious aspect of it is completely sheker and chazal. And the last part that we have to understand, and most people just are not shy to us at all, and it's something that's really worth working on. The Torah, the Mishpatim, the Dinim, is meant to be a method, a way for you to express your commitment to a relationship with God. There is no separateness, there is no aloofness, there's nothing like that. Because Baruch Hu is an ever-present being in your life, just like your father, or your brother, or your friend. And when you do religiosity, don't do it as an act of rote or some high of religion and some societal peer pressure community. None of those things are valid modes or reasons for someone to do religion. Do maisim of mitzvos and limud Torah directly because there is a being in your life called God, and you want to make him happy, and you want to please him and do his ratzon, and establish that relationship with him, and establish that as the basic drive for why you do Yiddishkeit, because that's the makor of everything. That's the basis of everything. If you're doing Yiddishkeit and it's not as a conscious act of trying to relate to a God, then there's no value in what you're doing, essentially, because that misses the entire point. Shabbos.